Board Subcommittee on Landscape Regulations. The date is Wednesday, January
Wait, hold on.
1st, 2026.
Green,
January
and
7th.
then it went off. I don't know if any of that was picked up.
Yeah, no, we're hoping that it gets picked up.
It's January 7th, not 1st.
I said something.
Oh, I thought you said 1st, I'm sorry.
It's okay. And, Randy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So, from the last time we met, I think the original intention was to take the modifications suggested to the table of contents, do a little more information. But I sort of, once I got into it, I started just adding that even more information. So I wouldn't call these a formal draft of the proposed landscape regulations, but is really taking the table of contents and really sort of bringing it to a point where there's a lot more meat on the bones. So there's things in here that we can go through, and I can tell you just what I was thinking. What I did was to use the table of contents as modified in our discussion last time as the basis for this, and then went through and did some research, added information to it, took some information from the 2018 landscape reg information that you have, introduced some of that, but really more than just adding some general intent, put information in here for you guys to really review and digest and be able to get a sense on where this is going, probably in a fuller way, more succinct way than what it was with the table of contents. Highlights. A couple of things that probably are worth highlighting is the approach to parking lots, the perimeter or buffer in parking lots is somewhat similar to what you had in the landscape regs, but instead of having 4 different choices, they basically have one choice, and if they want to offer an alternate, they can, but the intent is, so that would be on page 3. And then on the interior, the parking lot interior really sort of took and got more prescriptive than what was in the previous regs, and started to really hone in on being able to provide a parking lot that has a decent amount of landscape area within it, so that, and I think it's pretty clear. I looked at a couple of different regs that this one came from, so was able to I think, give a lot more meat on the bones of the parking lot landscaping. And then I think the thing that is not, hasn't been developed yet, but is alluded to in the very beginning, is specialized features. And so it probably isn't as important as the other information, but just wanted to have the ability to introduce the idea of specialized features. So number 3 on the introduction and intent. So things like green roofs, living walls, public art, specialty landscape features and such. I'm going to have some information. I'm still researching it right now. I do want to have some information on that towards the end of the regulations. So that's a quick and dirty overview of where we're at.
Randy, this is a very general question, but in what portion of this have you thought about where we would put illustrations?
I have thought about it, and I get inspired every time I open up a new reg that has illustrations in it. Some of them have like them all at the end, and they're kind of like what the town has now, sort of relatively simple line drawings. I was looking at a reg yesterday that had colored illustrations
Yeah.
of the intent that I really liked it a lot. It's really, what's the right way to say this? Different from the simple line drawing, it makes it look more meaningful.
Meaningful is good.
Meaning like, you know, the line drawing is like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. An island for every 10 spaces looks like this. And a simple line drawing can certainly illustrate that, but I was looking at a reg yesterday that had colored drawings for it, and it really, there's a level of seriousness, I guess,
That's good.
that I thought, that I was struck by in having it done that way. So,
And since everything is predominantly online,
So I think what you're saying, Randy, the illustrations would give an example of what you're trying to achieve through the regulatory language.
correct, right.
So it's really articulating what the
Yeah.
words result in.
Right, so under the, like, the parking lot buffer, there's the currently a shade tree every 30 feet with shrubs. I put a little more meat on the bones, but they would have, in the current regs, you've got 5 different choices for that, and it's a
Yeah.
simple line
And you
drawing.
can replace it with a 6-foot tall fence.
Right, and so, and there's a line drawing that shows that, and even if those were just colored, I think that would be more impactful and meaningful to representing what it is that you're trying to achieve. So,
Yeah,
I like the color ones.
And don't you think it's more impactful if they happen where the
Yes.
reg is, rather than having to like,
Go
you
to
know,
an
read
appendix
this
or
and go
something.
to the back and then find what you're doing? So if you're reading the regs and then you see
Yeah.
graphically, I think
Yeah.
that really
Oh,
sends it
absolutely.
home.
Yeah, I would
lot more.
agree with that, yeah.
I think to Randy's point, though, potentially putting them in one place within the regs gives you the most flexibility, because sometimes you'll have a paragraph, and your graphic is literally a page. You can't put the page illustration when you already have a paragraph at the top of the page. So you're potentially doing an injustice to the illustration or the diagram, because you're trying to squeeze it in a spot.
And that leads to
Yeah,
sort of
that's
just
a
an
good point.
overall general question that I wanted to get out there and start thinking about or having answered today is, if you look at this, you can see how some of these parts may belong in another part of the regs. And so, in thinking about sort of like a final deliverable, is it something that you think it's worth going through and pulling out those things, and probably defer to you, Jamie, or Maria, on what pieces would go elsewhere, and then sort of start talking about the graphics that would illustrate what would be the core, if you will, of the landscape regs?
Yes, to answer your question, yeah. I can take a closer look at the structure of this, the wording that you've started. You know, a couple of things that just jumped out at me, you know, requiring a developer to maintain 30% of the existing trees on site that are over 12 inches. If you're really doing that can be an attribute or also a detriment to coming up with really good design where you're trying to hold on to something for today instead of building a landscape for tomorrow. And I know Susan and I have had discussions of this online and offline about you can create something that will be celebrated as a wonderful landscape endeavor 20 years from now when it matures versus trying to hold on to something that is fighting good design. So I think it's a lofty goal, sometimes it's hard to achieve that, or give the developer enough flexibility, you know.
Yeah, as long as it's not an out for them to plant.
Well, most developers are gonna say, I mean, if it's a savvy, I'll
Saplings
say it
and-
now, is, I'm gonna do a timber
Plugs.
cut before I come into the planning board, and I'm gonna cut everything above 12 inches down. And I'm gonna do a stone wall harvest. Now what? So again, I've been in those meetings, and I've watched developers do it.
Won't it cost them more money though, in the long run?
No.
No?
Because they'll get a couple $100,000 from the timber harvest, and they'll get another $100,000 from the stone wall harvest. And so again, it's finding a happy medium in that language.
And along with what I was saying about some of the parts of here are gonna come out and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
This also, I guess, there are things in here right now that, and that's a good example of it, that probably can't exist in these regs without having language elsewhere in regs that set up the ability for that not to have happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is like the goal. Can it get in right away? Probably not, especially without having sort of language elsewhere that prevents, sort of like stripping and, you know, quarrying gravel out of a site. You know, you have language elsewhere that helps that not to happen. But the point is a good point that for walls and forested areas, you know, a savvy developer will say, I don't want to have to worry about that. Go in and clear cut it in a year before I even go to the planning board.
Yeah, and again, it's like, I would say, this is a Randall Arendt type item where you're trying to fit a residential, we'll call it use a fancy planning term, cute development within the existing built environment. But if you're building a Belmont shopping center, you're not saving the 12-inch trees. If you're building a small industrial building, you're not saving 12-inch trees. If you're building South County Commons, you're not saving 12-inch trees. I think to Randy's point, that if you're not doing this, you're almost held to a higher standard on landscaping to bring that back.
Right, right.
To bring that back.
Does there need to be a definition of healthy mature trees? Thinking about a project that we approved that had South Road, that had quite a few conifers, that some of which were
It was all hemlock,
diseased.
so much hemlock.
Yes.
Now that they're
And-
building
and
it 5 years
Canadian
later,
hemp.
there's almost nothing to see.
Right, there will be no buffer.
There'll be no buffer, because they waited 5 years and all those hemlocks have died.
And we should have had a little more ability to say.
Well, that was when they wanted to do a whole row of arborvitae instead of the, yeah.
Right, but is
In the
that
woods.
something that, given some of our experiences,
Yeah, I think language on that, like, I'm just reading it again and I'm thinking aloud, the minimum of 30% of the existing healthy trees shall be preserved, or if you're not preserving those, then you take this existing landscape code and you have to do 30% more than that.
Right.
You have to replace what you're taking. Our goal is to
yeah,
preserve,
Yep.
and if you're not preserving, then our landscape code, say, required 100 trees, you're planting 130 trees now, you're planting
Right.
150 trees.
if something's gonna
Because
die
you
in a
weren't-
year.
You asked, and again, there are some really good developments that you wouldn't want this to get in the way of.
Yes.
If a developer was willing to go, and you'll make
Sure.
them regulatory, from a regulatory standpoint, be required to go beyond the norm. You have a choice. You can work your development around these trees and plant 100. Or if you're gonna take them down, then you have another code you have to apply to.
So do we need to do something that once it's left our desk? And I'm thinking about Shepherd's Run out on Route 1, where after they finished getting all of their approvals and they started to renovate that building, they went in there one day and cut down the entire alley of evergreen trees. Remember the drive-in was flanked by 40-foot conifers, and they just removed every single one of them. And that was part of their charming presentation to us was this beautiful treed alley coming in, which they completely eliminated the day after they walked out of here. And I don't think we had any way to,
That was on the west side of their field. There's a reason,
It was, one side was the vineyard,
yeah,
Or
it was on the west
to be
side of the
vineyard,
vineyard, the
but
uphill
the
side
other
of the
side
vineyard.
was,
they took everything down.
Yeah, there is a
But part of their plan,
engineering reason for that.
but that's not what we were buying when they walked out of here. That wasn't part of the deal. And so, I don't know if we needed to better articulate what they could and couldn't, but it's their property, they went on and cut every single tree down, and then we have nothing left.
So one of the things that I'm thinking that under the, landscape plan, the submission requirements is, obviously talks about preparing a landscape plan, but maybe just as important to the preparation of the landscape plan is a plan that also shows vegetation to be preserved. And so if that was something that they wanted to present as vegetation to be preserved, then that, if we have them include vegetation to be preserved within the landscape plan, then that's something that gives you the ability to say, okay, that's, you said you're gonna preserve that, so that's part of the approval.
Does it need to be more proactive and also include vegetation to be removed? Because I think if we're not careful, there could just be an oversight where, it didn't say they were taking it out, so I thought they were gonna, like, I don't know if we need to be more proactive and demand a,
The plan should only show vegetation that's
Right.
going to be, going to be there going forward. You shouldn't, whatever's there now is meaningless.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, I look at it as, there's gonna be vegetation that they're showing, possibly showing not to be touched as part of the project. But there is also vegetation that's significant, either because of size or the character that it creates for that property, or how it fits into the surrounding landscape, or noteworthy trees or plant material, that is gonna be, they wanna protect that, so part of the approval is based on their protection of that important vegetation.
Single properties that are singularly owned or controlled, we'll say at South County Commons, right? You, to Randy's point, you could have a landscape plan that says, here's what's being preserved, here's what's being planted, and here's what you're never gonna touch. That's kind of one person. But take South County Commons and make it a 100-lot subdivision.
But she also wants to know what's gonna be
Once
removed.
someone owns that individual lot within that 100-lot subdivision, it is a regulatory nightmare to go on the individual's property and say, you should not have cut that tree down. So
Yeah.
I get that, but along the
there's
land.
two kind of standards there.
Yeah, and I think you gotta stay away from the latter,
Yeah.
obviously. And, well, I guess I would say it this way, stay away from it being on private property, but if the vegetation is significant enough, then maybe it falls within a conservation
Yeah,
easement
it's
area.
in a conservation,
because I'm wondering if-
HOA, it becomes singular versus individual.
Right,
I'm wondering if what Susan referred to as the LA could be considered in the same context as when we now are asking for the streetscape at an entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can't just cut them all down.
Right.
So we also had a big project in town that came and limbed up all of their buffer. And,
I drive past it every day.
and it's,
There's understory there, it just hasn't.
oh my
grown
God,
back.
planting some goldenrod is not an understory make. I just don't even. So there doesn't seem to be a penalty in this town, but also, do we need to beef up the threat to eliminating this valuable buffer that we had the town collectively agreed was going to be part of the project? And then they just go in and cut it all down, like cutting all the trees down at McDonald's last year, like, or Burger King. Like,
Right.
there has to be some penalty and something if you go in and deliberately disregard the agreement.
Yeah, that's something that's slightly outside of what I'm gonna be doing.
Yeah.
I do have some, oversight information in here, but, I mean, yeah, for as long as people can do that stuff and get away with it, then the next person will feel like they can get away with it.
And I think a lot of things are clarity in the plans you're approving. You know, I've had the discussion with you too about developments I've worked on in my career where you never thought about the need to say, you know, in a 500,000 square foot shopping center, when someone's doing the boulevard and planting mature trees, and you're envisioning as a planner that, you know, in 30, 40 years, is this gonna be a grand parkade going into the development, and you never thought that. In year 3, they were gonna hire a tree company and take your oak trees and make them topiaries. What comes out of that knowledge, unfortunately, is when you make regulatory changes, you put in the notes that trees that are planted have to be allowed to grow in their natural form and shape and not mechanically manipulated to some other shape or form. I wrote a note down, what happens when things go wrong after the fact?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's usually when you become more savvy in your approvals, you become more savvy in your regulatory language. But
We're cynical.
ultimately, what happens when things go wrong
Mhm.
after the fact? It's in Rhode Island, it's a $500 per day fine. But someone would go back to the plans and say, show me where it says
Said
I
that.
can't cut that.
Yes.
And that's where,
So we're-
unfortunately, as a planner, people go, well, you know, why are regulations 200 pages long? I'm like, for that exact fact.
Because we've learned our lessons.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, you know, you'll see when we're reviewing larger projects that we're gonna start putting language in there, and it's easier to put it in the regulation that said, if you're proposing to plant a street tree, that street tree is planted to be maintained in its character
Yep.
as it was intended to grow up in a natural environment and not manipulated. Now, the other aspect of that is you go on Bellevue Ave in Newport, but again, you're looking at 100-year-old trees that, the elms, some of their majestic trees have been manipulated over time, and they're 80 to 100 feet
Mm.
tall.
Disease as well.
But that's someone taking care of them
Yes.
over 80 years.
Right.
You know, that doesn't happen at, you know, the Target and Lowell's shopping center.
Right. And Newport also has a tree conservancy, which is.
Yeah, but it's trying to write some language into
I have to leave.
what
Sorry.
happens when it goes
I'll
wrong.
catch up with Jamie.
Yeah,
Well, that's all right. The one thing I think before you go is that I'm gonna send out, well, I put this in the form of a question. Does it make sense for me to send out this in a Word file and then put track
Sure.
changes on it,
Yeah.
and then add your comments in?
yeah, I can.
Ooh, that would be great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
See
Mary.
everyone next week.
Bye-bye, see ya.
And I think and again, we value your time, Randy. What it may be beneficial to, and I don't wanna drag you out, is that in maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we meet as a group and try and consolidate comments and concerns and then get them to
Yeah,
you
that's fine.
as one voice.
Yeah, that's fine.
Unless you're comfortable sitting here and taking the time out, but, yeah,
Changed your mind.
that would be important, Maria.
Oh,
Have a
boy.
good evening, safe travels. But just
Yeah, no, that's
to
fine.
be
No, that works.
conscientious of your time.
I mean, that just,
Just to revisit one point, we were talking about the illustrations at the end, illustrations at the beginning. I was recently reading through the land use regulations again, and they're all at the back.
yeah.
And to me, that's too far away, because as you're reading through a very dry list of regulations and you don't have the illustrations, it's just too far away. I get your point about just you can't control the text, but it ought to be, you can space it out so you have a description, 1 or 2 descriptions, and then some illustrations. So I would say space it appropriately, given how the formatting falls.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that if it's gonna be, if it's gonna live online primarily, which it's going to, and that's gonna be the way people look at it, I think you have more flexibility.
You do, because then you don't have page breaks.
Right.
Yes.
Or even if you have page breaks, you're able to.
You can scroll back and forth.
Yeah, it's easier to, I would agree that having them as close to the written word as possible makes the most sense.
There is another alternative, instead of having them right with the text or all the way at the end, you could have like groupings of illustrations. So you have a certain number of pages and you have all the illustrations.
Yeah, I think.
For that, so you're not going quite as far.
You're not going to the end of a
Right.
200-page
Right.
document to find the drawings. You may be going 4 or 5 pages deep, but we could also start in.
But a
we
lot
could look at
depends,
what you're like-
a lot depends on what is the body
If
of
you're
text
talking
that
about
comes
parking
out.
lot standards, you could have that discussion on parking lot standards, and then have, talk for 2 pages of written words,
Mhm.
and then have the 2 pages of diagram.
Yes,
Then you talk into perimeter buffers, you talk
Yes.
all about the
Right.
language of perimeter buffers, then you have illustration. It can be broken up, but I understand Randy's point that you, the text is one thing. What you're really trying to drive home is the end product. And if there's an expectation of the end product, that can be illustrated well. And that's what everyone's expectations are gonna be. You don't really, I mean, if you ask me, Jamie, I love the picture, do the words get me there? I need to answer yes, right? And that's what I wanna be able to do.
So can we, so I missed the last meeting, I don't know where I was, but I missed the last meeting. Can you just explain to me, is this table of contents lined up with this document that he's brought us? And so each of these items, we're gonna talk about screening and buffers, and then write a page or a paragraph, or does this get added to something we already have, or is this a standalone? Can I just understand, like,
So Randy's intent last meeting was to give us kind of the format as a table of contents of the sections that the regulations
Yep.
contain. What he handed out today is kind of plugging into some of those. They don't align perfectly, but, if there's 15 sections, he's trying to populate those 15 sections with regulations.
yeah. So does this, what Randy's brought, completely replace what we had in here? Or is this in addition to it, or is this,
I think ultimately it's gonna replace it.
okay,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, the last thing I did, and I actually did this a little bit this morning, was once I had gone through and did the research and written this up, I then went back to that.
Yeah.
And there's some good stuff in there.
right,
So I started to pull some stuff out, and then I realized I didn't have enough time to do that. So my intent is to take more of the information that's in there that I think works well with where this is going.
Yep.
And then ultimately it will be a document that replaces that.
okay. Because like I'm looking at the subdivision, I mean, buffer areas is nearly an entire page in itself on the old document. So, I mean, I don't know if it's good stuff, but it is like,
Well, part of it is
Much
that you
more-
give them 5 choices and you describe each choice each time,
yeah,
even though the choices are very similar.
right.
And I'm basically,
You're not getting paid by the word?
I'm not getting paid by the word, yeah. And I, how often do some of those get implemented?
Yeah,
And also, do you really want to have some of those choices? Like, if they're having a 10-foot landscape area and their choice is to put a fence in as opposed to plantings, is that really what you want them to do? And I would suggest probably not. A fence might be placed in some other areas because of, like you wouldn't want a fence on a perimeter, let's say between the real world example. I'm not sure you'd want a fence between the Shaw's Plaza and the fast food place that's next door.
yes,
Perfect.
but they do want a fence around the new pot shop in town. So I understand their logic for wanting a fence around.
It's around the back for security reasons required by the state.
Right, but do we discriminate where the buffer's at? Buffer in the back, buffer in the front, like, in this case, a fence replacing a backyard buffer? Because it is also a change of use from the pot shop to that affordable housing complex. Instead of a landscape buffer, maybe that is a location where we would want a fence if we have that discretion. Or do they need to do a buffer and a fence?
Well, I guess I would say in that specific example, if they're required by the state to have a fence, and is that because of a,
They need
The
to
use-
secure their loading dock and loading areas.
So it's gotta be enclosed within a fence? Okay,
Well, no, I think that their loading dock enclosed within a secondary fence. This was the fence along the wetland in the back.
That's their loading area. That's their loading area.
But isn't there also a fence around that back loading area with a gate that you have to go through? Like, I think he's double fenced in the backyard. There's one out at the wetland, and then there's one closer to the building.
I don't recall that. I can check.
Because a 6-foot fence is certainly scalable if somebody wanted to.
yeah, I guess, so
I
I'm
mean, it's not
thinking
very
about it not as a security thing, but as a screen.
Right.
And so, if they didn't have the space, putting a fence with plantings, I think if they could do that, would be a good idea.
I think to Randy's point, if you give every developer the option that you can do a really nice landscape buffer, but it's gonna take up 20 feet, and it's gonna require you to plant a street tree 35 feet on center with another 20 understory plants. Or you can jump to option 4, which is no landscaping
And a
and
vinyl
a
fence.
6-foot
And the
fence, and reduce from 20 feet to 5 feet.
And
No
You may-
maintenance.
And
you
no
may- and you may
no
have some
maintenance.
developers who say,
it's a
I'm
no-brainer
just,
here.
I'm just
Yeah.
gonna, I'm gonna default to that.
Especially if they're
Versus-
gonna sell the property and not have to
Yeah.
worry about the maintenance.
Versus Randy saying, you're always gonna have to do A, except in some extenuating circumstances where the burden is, you have to prove to the planning board why your fence is actually better than the 20 feet of landscaping, and it may just be in a corner. Or it may be for a particular purpose, or I'm required to do it by another law.
Right.
That I feel
Yeah.
supersedes me. And
Yeah.
I've always said with developers, and I've never quite figured out how to write it into the regulation, is that saying A, I've been using the number, you gotta do 100 street trees and 500 understory plants. And someone says, well, in this corner I wanna do a fence because I have to. To me, it says, great, you're still gonna do 100
Right.
street trees and 500 understory plants and the fence, but you don't get to only do 80 trees and 400 plants. You're still regulatory tied to your original number, we're just gonna move them around.
I was just gonna say, and so because the fence makes it so they can't do the planting, then they still have to figure out how to plant that number of trees per the regulations.
Still goes around the site.
So the number of trees is linked to the property line, the length of property line, let's say.
Yeah, so if you have 1,000, if you had,
But having a 100-foot fence doesn't give them a break on the length of that property line that needs to be landscaped?
again, I've done this I've done it on the regulatory side, but we'll just say you have 1,000 feet of frontage on a commercial development. And in this particular community, we were required to do perimeter landscaping along the street. So we'll just say it was, 10 street trees. Well, 20 street trees,
Based on the length of it?
based on the length.
Yeah.
And then immediately there was an interior parking lot. And that interior parking lot required the same amount of trees. But because of some topography issues, the slope was like 50%. So how do you plant a tree at the top and a tree at the bottom? It kind of didn't work because you really wanted a tree in the middle, but you can't plant it on a 50% slope. So the requirement was 20 trees. So we didn't let the developer only plant 10. He still was required to plant 20.
10
He
for
just-
this and 10 for that?
10 for the top of slope and bottom of slope. That developer was arguing like, I can't do 20,
Right.
so I just want to do 10. And the planning board's like, no, no, no. Your requirement regulatorily is 20. We will give you the flexibility is where you put the 20 on the property, but we're not going to let you get out of planting 10 of our regulatory
Because of a site
required
condition.
trees. Because of a site condition, because in reality, instead of doing a 50% slope, you could do it flat with a retaining wall, which would cost you a lot of money versus just moving 10 trees around your site. And then he figured out, instead of doing, 50 feet on center, I'm gonna do them 30 feet on center, I'm gonna create an aerial 3 more trees, and he had to move 2 around, and he just tightened them up. And in the end, it became a very attractive landscape, but the relief wasn't let me out of a standard, it's just give me flexibility in the standard to move around the site. So to your point, if you had this Grand Ali going in, and someone said, you know, aerial hedges are great, but if you do sugar maples over time, you can't grow grass under the sugar maples because there's too much shade.
Or the root system, yeah.
Well, the root system with the maples is
No.
all over the place, so someone may say, I get it that you wanted me to do 35 feet on center. I would prefer to do 50 feet on center and then scatter some of those additional trees around my site. You'll get the same visual look, but I'd like a little more grass in between the trees. I wanna deal with, maybe I got a higher groundwater table, or I have
So,
something.
so similarly, if they had a 1,000-foot stretch and our regulations say they needed to put 100 trees in 1,000 feet, but they put fencing for part of it, they still have to plant 100 trees.
Yep.
Okay.
And then
Not
again,
jammed together along that property line, but somewhere.
in a,
On the site,
yeah, in a very well-done manner.
And they shouldn't be double
Otherwise,
dipping
you're
the
not gonna
ones-
give them relief for that fence.
Mhm.
You're not gonna let them put
Got
the
it.
fence up.
Well, the other thing that happens is once they know that they have to still plant the same number of trees, see how quickly the fence requirement disappears. They'll probably say, okay,
Right.
maybe we won't do a fence there, unless it's a regulatory issue from another
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, I was with, in another community where we had very kind of high fencing standards, and it was along a state highway, and they were torn because the state was requiring, basically they allowed, state right away allowed the box wire fence. The town standard required a very ornamental fence, which the state wouldn't approve, and we're kind of like, well, that's your problem, you're gonna have to do the box wire fence, and then a really nice pretty fence right behind it. In the end, what we got the state to sign off on was a PVC chain link fence, not a box wire. But then they did a evergreen planting along everything, but the evergreens actually grew through the fence, so you can't even see the fence anymore. But the evergreen plantings were in lieu of a really nice solid ornamental fence. So it was just accomplishing something to meet the regulatory requirement, but not necessarily lessening the standard. Actually, you ended up with a better product
Sounds like it.
with some flexibility. But it's not just saying, a developer saying, the state will only approve a box wire fence, therefore I don't have to do anything else.
Right.
It's like, no, you're still beholden to the regs. Let's just look for a little bit of flexibility in the regs. But if it said you had to do a fence and these plantings, you know, the fence has a value. Let's look at that value. And most developers I've dealt with, and Randy's probably dealt with as many as me, if not more, are like, look, you know, the fence is $20,000, here's your budget, $20,000 in landscaping, and you can probably do something pretty nice versus a fence.
Right.
You know, if they're just willing to do that. And if your regulations are written well, they don't have a choice. And I think that's Randy's point, don't give them the automatic default
Right.
to the fence. Otherwise, you'll always be arguing, you know, the other way. You know, we had that with, on Magnolia Lane, where to put the 2 duplexes, and they reduced their, and they were allowed to. Because the way our regs are written, you have 4 choices. There's not a hierarchy,
Right, right.
right? It isn't, if you can't accomplish one,
Then you go to
you can
number
default to
If you get a
B, C,
choice.
or D.
Right.
The developer gets to choose. I think Randy's saying, let's flip the narrative and the tone of it.
Yeah, and that, right, so there's the value that you get set. Now, you've got a site condition that you need to deal with. We're willing to entertain a proposal on what you're gonna do to solve your problem and meet the intent of the regs.
And I think that, to Randy's point, if you have that visual at the end, that's what you're trying to achieve. And if you get that for 95% of your site and you gave them relief on 5%, you've still won.
Especially if it's on the side or the back.
You know, we had the similar thing at Chipotle's where there was supposed to be a solid fence in the back, and in the end, with the guardrails, we allowed flexibility and put the cedar split rail in, which is potentially much more attractive than hard guardrails.
Yes, and they have woods behind them.
Yeah,
So I would have hated to have seen a fence blocking,
but that was
the view of the
initial
woods.
proposal, was a solid 6-foot tall fence then.
yeah.
You know, and to, you know, maybe if it's a one-off, but if, to Randy's point, if you went down the street and everybody did that, you know,
But on that site, they
everyone
also,
would be a walled fortress.
by the regulations though, at that site, they also had to plant some buffer landscaping at the back of the lot.
Yes.
But the back of their lot abutted, we also had this at an industrial site over on Liberty Lane, where the back of the site abutted the woods,
Yes,
which seems like a silly place to put some ornamental trees.
yes.
So it'd be good if we also had the ability, and if for Chipotle it didn't matter because they couldn't have done their turning rotations and their dumpster placement if they moved the trees around, but having them plant ornamental trees next to the forest, as opposed to up front where it actually would have counted for something,
The
was a darn shame.
forest they didn't own. So that's always.
Well, yeah, except, is there any discretion for the fact that it's like a 50% slope in a wetland? Like, it was never gonna do, nobody was ever gonna build
And
back there.
that's where there's some balance over time, and to my point, I've had developments where, you know, Home Depot has said, really, behind my loading dock,
Yeah.
next to the train tracks, in the cornfield on the other side of the train tracks, I still need to plant street trees 35 feet on center, on top of my 60-foot retaining wall. And it's like, yeah, unfortunately, from a regulatory standpoint, yes.
Mm.
Your alternative is maybe we reduce the spacing and you take that number and bring them out front, gives more value to the community versus the ones in the back of house. But I should take a picture of this one site. You go down back of house, it's like 1,600 feet of building, and there are street trees 35 feet on center. On top of a 40-foot plus retaining wall next to the train tracks overlooking cornfields. But that was that community's regulatory requirements, because they required the entire site to have perimeter street tree landscape.
Wow.
But the developer also argued in another section of that site that you're requiring me, he abutted a residential district, and we have a 100-foot requirement for a buffer between the residential district.
No.
That's a lot. When you have a 60, 70-acre site, you take 100 feet times 1,000 feet, the acreage adds up pretty quick, that he no longer has for gross leasable area. And that, you know, the residential neighborhood was thousands of feet into the woods, but he didn't own basically the buffer that was owned in the residential. We did work with them to reduce that buffer, but we moved plant material out to the public realm. We didn't reduce the number, we were just reduced where they go. So, and the neighborhood signed off.
How do we build that flexibility in, though? How do we build that flexibility into the regs that you're held to the number?
You ask for,
But-
you
You
add
can
the
move
waiver
them.
provision, you let every developer know that the only way you're gonna get the waiver is if it says you're doing 100 things, you're still gonna do those 100 things, you just get to move them around a little bit.
Does
If you're
that-
proposing to only do half of them, your waiver will get denied. And
So
then
does-
you have to go to the full standard, which means your project gets smaller.
Does that requirement in the waiver need to be written in the text?
Well, that's,
Yes.
but isn't that kind of language an overarching language for the regulations? So it wouldn't necessarily be just landscape specific, because there's gonna be
No,
other
it's
locations
yeah, parking,
where someone's asking for a
landscaping,
waiver.
grading walls, yeah.
And you might say allow setback variances to get a little more density, let's say, but they still need to meet the requirements, it's just put it somewhere different.
Yeah,
So I guess what I'm saying is the waiver is not specific to landscape, it's other features that you're gonna be allowing that flexibility to the
But I see
waiver.
us giving out waivers without getting anything in return. Like moving your building closer to the property line and getting a waiver for that doesn't buy me more real estate in another part of the
in
site.
the last 5
We
years.
just give them a
when has-
present.
When has the planning board granted a waiver and not gotten more than what the regulations require you to get?
I don't know, I sometimes get lectured about not asking for things that I'm not allowed to ask for.
So,
Never
in
hurts
most
to ask.
instances, you get upgraded create
We always push for a
architecture.
little bit.
We should push for something.
We should.
But the difficulty, and Randy's pointing now, when you go A, B, C, or D,
Right.
the developer is like, wow, I can get, you know, a 40,000 square foot building fits on this site if I do the really big buffers under A. But I can get a 50,000 square foot building, and the regulations allow me to just do a fence.
Hey, I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
So 10,000 GLA is important to me, or
Mhm.
X number of more units is important to me, and I think what you're saying is the default should always be A.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
for a strong, good design aspect, you will entertain an alternative to that through your waiver provisions. But only if it's really good planning, really good design.
Right, and this is all, that solution for the buffer is ultimately the preferred solution. So for example, you may have a developer come in, and if he's got the choice, he or she's got the choice of those different options, and the last project, the fence contractor did something that he owes the developer money, he's gonna go for the fence option because he can get it for pennies on the dollar, and he's making a decision for a buffer on your project in your town, not based on what the best is in the best, you know, for the project, but based on, you know, some financial things that he's able to do, you know, some shell game with dollars because of, you know, whatever took place on a previous development.
It's Rhode Island. His cousin's neighbor's brother owns the fence company.
So I think if we, we have a meeting in a couple weeks, and I can send an email out if you, and I'll talk to Maria, if you think it's productive for us to meet as a smaller group, kind of put our thoughts together, go over our red lines, and then try and condense those and get back to Randy, versus having him, spend a lot of time.
Yeah, so I'll send you the Word document.
Yeah,
for
and
this.
I can distribute to everybody, and we can mark it up.
So are we taking what Randy's done here, going into the old regulations, and then
I would,
figuring out what we're saving from the old stuff to move?
I intend on doing that, but I guess I would suggest that if there are elements in the old document that you think should be incorporated into this, is just, you know, write that as a comment.
I don't have the old document. I don't think I do either. Let me see what that.
So I actually went through all of the ordinance and subdivision regulations, and I copied and pasted any section that mentioned parking lots, trees, landscaping buffers, and I sent this as an email to you guys. Like, I can send it again.
Can you include me on that?
Yes. But this was just a copy and paste of all that.
It's this one.
Maybe just be, you know,
That might be the same thing.
I think it
That's it.
is.
Yeah, that's the same thing. And it was just a copy and paste of any
Do
place.
you want to make a copy of it?
I could email it around too.
If the copier is right in here, I'll
Yep.
make one for you too.
excellent.
I
I'll
did,
take it as an email as well.
I just did searches of all these keywords and tried to like just copy and paste
Yep.
sections that I could find in subdivision regulations and the ordinances. A lot of it is parking lot.
Do you remember when you sent that, Susan? Because I can send it to Randy right now.
I just dug it up because I wanted to look at it, and I feel like it was May. At least that's when I made the document.
Caper, is there a date on that? Okay.
No, I don't have it from you, Susan.
Yeah, I don't think you sent it around.
Was that? Did I bring you a hard copy? 'Cause
I
this is-
think you gave us hard copies.
Oh, really?
I don't know, I don't remember.
You know what, maybe, because you know what? That's really funny that yours printed weird.
Yeah,
Or is this mine?
That's yours, mine printed too.
Oh.
Turn it over.
You know what, mine printed weird today because my printer got jammed, so this is my copy.
Okay.
I can, I will forward it around as soon as I get home.
Okay.
And all it is a copy and paste of whatever I found in town.
Send it to me,
Can do?
send it to me, and I will distribute it.
Great, okay.
You want to send it to Randy too?
He
Yes,
will,
I will.
he's got my email.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
will do that.
He knows how to find me.
So we're gonna use that as anything that's not in here now that we think should be.
If there are things in the current regs that you have good success on or think are important,
Okay.
that should be incorporated, yes.
Okay. I'm just curious, how would you write 4 options, talking about the buffer and the fence, how would you write 4 options saying that you only get to number 4 if you can't do the first 3? How would you make number 1 the required?
I can answer that. You don't give them 2, 3, and 4.
You
You only
just-
have one option.
You only have 1. Okay, that answers it.
Yeah, I would say you don't, giving them choices, I don't think is
Okay.
a good idea.
You don't give them all 4 with stipulations on number 4, you just don't give them.
Yeah, I want to say that, to me, the choices came out of Lane Kendig's book, Performance Standards,
Oh, probably, yeah.
which was late 70s, early 80s, which, went around the country. A lot of towns just adopted that, and I
Thank
think
you.
it stayed in regulations. So, okay, but what we're potentially gonna do is, Randy's gonna send a Word document, we'll
Yep.
be able to redline it, you guys can send copies to me, I'll make sure Randy gets them, we'll sit as a group of 4, go over the red lines and try and, we'll say get 1 red line copy to Randy, and then have him have an opportunity to digest that, and then have a meeting with him, maybe the second meeting, to bring him back to us.
Okay.
Alright?
Yep.
So it's 5:15. Is everybody comfortable with ending the subcommittee meeting?
Yes.
Letting Randy go home?
Yes.
What about the rest of us?
You have to stay.
You have
You
to
as
stay.
well.
Thank you.
So at 4:15, we kind of have a plan of action for our next subcommittee meeting, and we'll be communicating with Randy Collins. So,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.